So I think reason and trust walk hand in hand. So it's okay to say, I don't know everything. And Lord, I'm going to walk in trust, but I'd like some deeper answers.
Well, welcome back to the Finding Something Real podcast, friends. This is your host, Janelle Wood. And I'm so glad that you're back because we're going to have a great conversation today. I'm joined by my co-host, Sarah. Sarah, welcome back to the podcast.
Hello, good morning.
Sarah, we just recorded a deep conversation yesterday with Alicia Wood, who's a great apologist here in the United States. And how are you feeling about that conversation from yesterday?
It was really good. Still thinking about it a lot. I took some notes and have more to follow up on. Hopefully if we get to talk again.
Yeah, she was great. And it was really fun to talk with her and Caitlin. Caitlin's an atheist. And so Caitlin got to hear the gospel maybe for the first time, which was pretty cool. I came away from that conversation just feeling excited about the conversations we get to have on here. And today we're joined by a returning guest. Now, I told him that he would probably have to introduce himself mostly, but I do remember the last time that this guest was on. And more than our conversation, I remember afterwards just having a candid conversation about ministry, his kindness. And he also sent me a book, which a lot of times speakers that come on here, they will send books and it's amazing. But not always do I get a copy. And I selfishly, I have a sin nature. And so it's so wonderful when I get a copy. And this book, Do Muslims and Christians Worship the Same God? Really good, Andy Bannister. He's here and joining us today. Andy, welcome back to the podcast.
Janelle, it's great to be back. Hello, Sarah. And great to hear you had Alicia on. Alicia is an old friend of mine from my days in North America. We did quite a lot of things together. So she's a powerhouse. And as long as you could get her off the subject of hockey, bring hockey up. Oh. You'll be. Did it come up?
No.
Oh no, it didn't come up. You're okay then. She's a massive NHL kind of fan. So if you accidentally, ask about anything to do that's even hockey adjacent, you can lose her.
Oh my word.
She's good news.
You know what's funny though? I did hear. It's funny how the whole apologetics world is connected. Apologetics, giving a defense for your faith and gentleness and respect. I was listening to the Joe Rogan podcast about a year ago, and I hear this guy, Wesley Huff,
Where's Huff?
And talking about a mutual friend, Andy Bannister.
Oh, yeah. I know.
You got a shout out.
I know, it's amazing. The funny thing about that, Janelle, is that I've known Wesley since he was, 17 or something. When I was in Toronto, he was there. And we used him at a few events. It was great to watch how he was growing. And then he turns up on Rogan, and he name drops me and about three others. I forget who the others were. It wasn't just me, and he didn't tell us. So suddenly my phone is lighting up with dozens of people going, "Dude, we just heard you on Rogan." I'm getting retweeted and tagged, and I'm like, "What on earth?" And then Wes messaged me, "Oh, sorry, I should have probably told you." So, yeah, thanks, buddy.
It was so cool.
No, Wes is great. He's a good lad.
Yeah. So you've been doing apologetics for a while. You're the director of the Solas. Will you tell a little bit more about your position, what you do, Andy?
Yeah.
Great.
So happy to. So Solas is, or Solas, I don't know how it's pronounced. It's a Scots Gaelic word. So wherever I go in Scotland, they tell me I'm pronouncing it wrong, Janelle. So I've never got quite sure. Solas is the Scots Gaelic word for light. And so we're a small Christian organisation that was founded in 2010 in Scotland. We're now across the whole of the United Kingdom. I'm based in England. So there's 3 of us down here in England, 4 in Scotland, and some hangers-on. And we really do 2 things. The first thing we love to do is take the message of Jesus out of the church and into public places. So I do lots of events in schools, universities, workplaces, cafes, pubs, restaurants, you name it, neutral spaces. And then the other half, we love helping Christians think about how to engage their friends in conversations about Jesus. Because so many Christians, I don't know how it is in the US, but here in the UK, people are nervous about talking about faith at work, with friends, family, that kind of stuff. So we like to see if we can help take the fear away a little bit. So yes, that's what we do. And a bit of writing, a bit of online stuff, a bit of podcasting. So that's who we are.
Yeah. You wrote a book called How to Talk About Jesus Without Sounding Like an Idiot, I think.
I did. Yeah. Yeah. So that was the last book but 1, last book but 2. There's been 2 since then. So yeah, that one was really designed to do what it says on the tin, that I think a lot of Christians are afraid they'll look like idiots. And certainly I did when I was in my first few jobs and stuff. So that was the book I wish I could send through a wormhole and give to my 25-year-old self. And then since then, we've had a book last year, did a book called Have You Ever Wondered? Just 28 kind of questions to get people thinking about faith. Have you ever wondered why justice matters? Have you ever wondered why beauty moves us? And so on. So that's done really well, actually. It's been aimed at friends who don't have faith. And for Christians, so they've found it a really easy book to give away. It's a very gentle starter. And then this year, we updated my first books. The first book I wrote was a book called The Atheist Who Didn't Exist. It was responding to the new atheism and looking at the problems with a lot of atheist arguments. And we went back and revisited it 10 years on. Because, of course, the new atheism's died. It's dead. It is no more. Who would have known that 10 years ago? Dawkins and co. were ascendant. Sam Harris on your side of the pond. And that movement just died. It's gone. And people are rediscovering faith again.
What about Alex O'Connor?
Alex is an interesting guy, isn't he, old Alex? I mean, he's an interesting one. He has gone from hardcore, almost anti-theist when he began. Cosmic skeptic was where it began. He still uses that brand, but not nearly so much, right? Alex O'Connor. And now I think he's much more in a position now. I think he'd like it to be true. You just begin to get that sort of sense that this matters. He can see the impact that it makes, but he just doesn't think it's real. But that's a massive step on from I hate everything to do with kind of faith. So I'm an optimist. I'm a glasses half full guy. I like to think he's on a long, long, winding journey. I mean, C.S. Lewis, right, one of my heroes, went from ardent atheism and then through a series of positions and ended up as a Christian. But it was a series of hops over several years. So Alex has made the toughest one in some ways from, I don't think it's true to, I think it's all rubbish to, I wish it were true. And maybe atheism doesn't explain everything. So we'll see. We shall see.
Interesting. Have you talked with him?
I have never, actually. He's on my bucket list. I'd love to, kind of thing. So, kind of thing. So, I don't move in the same elevated circles. His following on social media is bigger than mine. I mean, there are other people who are having great conversations with him. So,
he was talking to a Christian podcaster the other day. I thought, wow, how did that happen? So you just never know.
He was on with Bear Grylls the other day. He was known for doing sort of outward bound adventure stuff, and he and Bear were talking. So I'm like, man, he's talking to some interesting people.
Yeah.
Good on Alex.
I have one more question for you before I hand it over to Sarah.
I was going to say, poor old Sarah's being so patient and
she's got deep questions, I know, but I think before I give it to her, I want to ask one more. Where does all this come from? Most people would not be motivated the way you are to pour out their life, writing these books, trying to reach their friends, sharing about faith. Clearly, I started to read some of this. You grew up in a pluralistic society. Everyone has these different beliefs and religions and different things. So where does this passion come from for you?
Well, the simple answer is from the Lord. Try and put some details below that. I mean, that book that you're waving around there tells the story of how I hadn't really thought about this stuff until I started going up to London and trying to talk about my faith with Muslims. A friend had encouraged me to go and give it a go and try street preaching, and it was a disaster. And I realized, okay, well, either Christianity is true and I need to actually do the work and find the answers, or isn't true and I need to abandon it because I don't believe in things that aren't right. And that was the beginning of the rabbit hole, and it sort of went from there. And then I think that that was the way into the public speaking. That led to the PhD in Islamic studies, and then writing. I've always enjoyed writing. I mean, I was writing in my 20s, but it was more I was messing around trying to write a novel. Everyone has a novel in them, don't they? That's what they say. That's the saying. Everyone's got a novel in them. In my case, it wasn't a particularly good novel. So, so actually, that was not the way to go. But I've always loved writing and communication, and so that piece kind of came in as well. So I enjoy doing it. I enjoy helping people with their honest questions. I love having people see the difference faith makes. I love helping Christians feel that little bit more confident about talking about Jesus naturally, and that it doesn't have to go badly wrong. And I love people. I think the heart of it, I find people interesting. Which we should do as Christians, because even people that disagree with us, everyone's made in God's image. So as Christians, we should find people interesting, and that's a good start for evangelism.
All right, Sarah, I've got more questions in my mind, but I know that you've got lots, so let's go over to you here.
Hey, Sarah.
Okay, cool. So I would love to start talking about morality, because
fair enough. That's a good place to start on a Friday afternoon. Well, Friday morning.
Sure.
Morality.
So I haven't been able to read your books yet, but from the title of How to Talk About Jesus Without Looking Like an Idiot, it brought up in my mind a time when I tried to talk about Jesus and looked like an idiot, because I was talking about morality and how it it needs to be grounded in God, and like, where does it come from if it's
Yeah.
not from God, right? And was talking with people my age, and they were able to give me a rebuttal of like, it's
Okay.
just culturally based and that's how things change. And so I've been thinking about that, and I have read about it some and heard debates and
Yeah.
things, and it's not quite landing for me of why it
Yeah.
is needed to be based in God and
Yeah.
it can't be culturally determined.
What a great question, Sarah, is the first thing to say. I mean, you're definitely on the right track, because here's the big idea. If morality has to be outside of us, otherwise it just isn't morality. It just doesn't work. It needs to be something we submit to, otherwise it has no authority, is the first problem. And that's what you run into with a cultural piece. So one of the problems you run into with a cultural piece is going, well, okay, well, whose culture? So take China, for example. China has a very different moral code to us. They're running a mass surveillance society. They don't believe in democracy. They're running a slow motion genocide against the Uyghur Muslim community, rounding them up, imprisoning them in concentration camps, and running slave labor factories. And a lot of the digital gadgets that we like are often made there, so we are morally complicit. But here's the thing. In the West, we'd look at that and go, that's terrible. Well, if you think morality is culturally bound, there's nothing wrong with it. China can do exactly what the hell they want, and we can jump up and down about human rights, and the Chinese Communist Party can go, yeah, that's just your culture, go away. Most of us, and I hope most of your friends would go, no, that's outrageous. It doesn't matter that the society says that imprisoning people because of their ethnicity or their religious background is okay. It isn't okay. And I'd say exactly, it isn't okay. But if you keep morality at the level of culture, then you can't do anything. But the very nature of human rights demands that moral values are transnational. And by the way, it's interesting, you look back to World War II and the Nuremberg trials that followed World War II, when a lot of the former SS officers were on trial for what they'd done. They tried this defense. That was one of the standard defenses that SS officers, Nazis, would make. They would say, well, in Nazi Germany, we were told to do what we did to the Jewish people and other minorities, and it's a good thing in German culture to follow orders, so we were doing the right thing. What we did was right. And the Nuremberg judges ruled to a man and one woman that morality transcends society. So actually what you did was wrong, no matter what your society told you. So that's the first place you can go, Sarah. Second place you can go is, if you say that morality is culture bound, culture changes. Culture changes. So to your friends who are not Christians, but if they're perhaps, liberal leaning, you could say, okay, do you think that gay marriage, for example, is okay? Your friends will probably go, yeah. It's okay now. It wasn't okay 20 years ago. So 20 years ago, it was okay for it not to be okay. 100 years ago, it was okay to, arrest people for their sexuality. 200 years ago, slavery was okay. It was okay to collect mass numbers of people from Africa and ship them across the world and put them into indentured slavery, because that was what society said. So you can say to your friend, that's interesting. So you think slavery was okay then? How curious. Your friend is probably going to go, no, it's never okay. I agree with you. But for it to never been okay, morality has to be external to us. It has to be bigger than me and you. It has to be bigger than society. It has to be bigger than, time and place. It has to be something out here that we discover, not something we invent. So that's where I'd begin with your friend, saying, you realize what you've just said. You've just condemned the Uyghurs. You've condemned slaves. You've condemned any monstrosity that was done at a different time and place to here. I think you need to think again.
Mm-hmm.
Does that
Okay,
help a little
good
bit?
answers. Yes, I'm trying to think through. So if you're a Christian and you say that God has given us a sense of morality, then how do you explain the changes in what we see as being okay?
Yeah. Great question. I would modify the way you phrase it there ever so slightly. I would say that it's not that God has given us as Christians a sense of morality. What he's built into humanity is a sense of morality, because our
Yes.
atheist friends can be moral people too. That our atheist
Mm-hmm.
friends have a sense of right and wrong, is the first thing. What we're debating is there's two things you need to think about: what is real, and how we come to know what's real. So the first question is: does morality really exist? Is there a moral realm out there? And the second question is: how do we come to know that it's true? And on that last part, that means there will be debate and disagreement as we think these things through. And that's the same as actually, by the way, as in science. It means that morality and ethics works not dissimilarly to the sciences. So, several hundred years ago, when people thought that the Earth stayed still and the sun went round the Earth, that was the science at the time. Of course, now we know better because science has developed. Does that mean that therefore science is purely relative? You make it up as you go along? No. It's meant that it's taken hard work to figure out what is true and what is right. But we've still gone out there and explored the realm of science and discovered truth. And I'd say the same with morality. It took society some time to realize that slavery was wrong. But slavery was always, always wrong. It just took humanity some time to figure that out. Human rights has always been the case. Christians have known since the book of Genesis that human beings, every man, every woman, no matter your background, bears the image of God and has value. It's just society has taken a while sometimes to figure that through. And so, yeah, that's what I would say as the answer to that. Separate in your mind the question, are there such things as morals and values and duties? And how do we discover what those are? Those are two slightly different questions. And by the way, it also allows you to be humble as a Christian and go, as a Christian, I don't know everything. And I'm not perfect. I will mess up. Because the gospel doesn't say you have to be perfect. The gospel says God gives you the power to change. That process of change takes time as the Spirit works in you. But just because Christians stuff up sometimes doesn't mean morality isn't real. Just means we're not perfect.
Mm-hmm. So if people could say, I have this sense of morality, like I believe that this is right and wrong, but I understand that people in a different country or culture don't see it that same way, then is that a way to escape from the idea of God-given morality?
No, I don't think it is, because the moment you start making value judgments. So one of the things I will often do with skeptical friends, and encourage you to keep doing with your friends, is right. They ask you questions, Sarah, but turn the tables and say, you need to tell me where your value judgments kind of come from, because if what they're saying is true, it's not just culture that sets moral values, it's individuals is ultimately what they're saying. So for example, you could theoretically halfway through the conversation reach across to your friend and just steal their phone, just pick their phone up and put it in your pocket, and they'll say, what are you doing? You'll say, well, no, you've convinced me that morality is just personal. So you think stealing phones is wrong, I think stealing phones is right. And of course, you wouldn't dare tell me that I'm wrong, would you? Because that would be very arrogant. So anyway, keep going. They'll be jumping up and down going, give me my phone back. And we go, thank you. Have we discovered moral bedrock yet? Because morality just doesn't work once you start saying it's just personal preference. What you just have is might makes right. The person who's got the biggest fist is going to keep the phone. And in culture too, however much they may protest, your friends do not believe, I do not believe any of your friends believe, unless you hang out at Psychopaths Anonymous, think that locking up Uyghur men and women in China in internment camps is okay just because they're Uyghurs. They'll be sitting there going, oh gosh, that's a bit bad. The trouble is they feel a bit bad, they feel a bit awful judging other cultures. They've been banged around the head so much that you must never judge another culture. So well, I think we can judge other cultures. And other cultures can judge us too. By the way, there are plenty of things the West gets wrong. We've downplayed the importance of family. We've got a lot we can learn from our African and our Asian friends about the importance of family and those kind of levels of commitment. We can judge other cultures, and we can judge the past. We can look back and go, our ancestors were insane with the slave trade. They were utterly morally abhorrent, and we can make that judgment. But if it's just personal preference, then you're just being arrogant. But if morality transcends society, we can go, those things are wrong because God created men and women in his image, and anything that attacks or downgrades or hurts an image bearer is immoral.
How would you then view the people who do not share your sense of morality in other cultures? Do you have to see them as evil, or how are they justifying the choices that they're making?
That's a really good question. Well, I think it depends on the person, right? I think as certainly as Christians, we can stand here and go, we can call evil evil. And by the way, our friends want to do this. So I think it's okay to stand there and call the Chinese Communist Party evil. What it's doing is a genocide. And you don't need to be a Christian to draw the conclusion that it's evil. You can go read a book. I forget the author, but there's a book called Life in the Camps, written by, I think, a Canadian author, looking at, which has been the best Western study, because it's hard to get in there, of what life is like in those Uyghur concentration camps. And I think he would pretty much use the word evil. He's not a Christian, but I think my question for him would be, how are you making your value judgments? So I think we can call some things evil. We can call the Nazis evil. We weren't there, but I have no problem calling Hitler and the Third Reich evil. Then you meet people lower down, I think, Sarah, who are caught up in it. So someone's been raised in a society where life is cheap, and that's come through in the way they treat people. Then I think we can be firm, and we can say, I think you need to change here. I think this is a problem, the way you're treating people in this situation. But I think you can hold back from going, you're evil. We can have sympathy and go, well, given the context you've grown up in, I can perhaps understand it. I've got a friend, actually. Well, I had a friend. We've lost touch in recent years, but a friend of mine who was a psychiatrist in Egypt for many years and really committed Christian. He did a lot of work with guys who'd come to Christian faith out of Islam. And one of the things that he did was he put together a course to put men who'd come to Christian faith out of Islam through to help them come to a more helpful understanding of their view of women. Because in Islam, women are largely second-class citizens. It's a whole topic in its own right. And as he put it, he said, we found out over the years that former Muslim men can often make quite bad husbands. He said, but 3 months, let me add them 3 months, I can help do some sorting out. Now, he would say, I love these guys, they're fantastic. But the culture they've come from, it's okay to go, the view that you have of women as being nothing more than there to, give you sons and heirs is unhelpful, and it's not right, and we can deal with this. So I think, you can judge people. You can do it without judging them. You can be kind and compassionate. We can call evil. And the last thing, Sarah, I'd say, is be open when you talk to people. You say to people, look, if you see me behaving in a way that you don't think lines up with how you think a Christian is, say to your friends, please tell me, because I want to know. Don't sit there whispering behind your hands going, Sarah's done this, but can we tell her? I want you to tell me. Tell me if you think I'm being a jerk. Because how am I going to learn? My own friends don't stand up and go, hey, that's not what a Christian should do. Sometimes they're wrong and they're misjudging you. Sometimes they're right. And if they're right, again, you can be humble and go, thank you for telling me that. Because as Christians, we should know our identity is not in what people think of us. Our identity is in Christ. So we should be people who model openness and transparency.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Can I ask one follow-up question on that?
These are great questions, Sarah, by the way. Thank you. You've been thinking really deeply.
You brought up gay marriage as an example to prove the point. But if you were to say something like that, I imagine that a progressive friend might go, yeah, I do think that is immoral, and you're a Christian and you don't believe that. So how would you... Does that open up a can of worms that you...
Do you know, I love cans of worms. And I was being slightly naughty because using examples that if you're talking to a progressive friend, and I prefer that to left and right. I hate this whole left-right rubbish. To go, someone who would happily own the title progressive. Sometimes I like dropping those bits of bait in, because if they go, well, what about Christians on this issue? To go, I'm glad you asked. Firstly, the fact that you think that marriage is okay between two people of the same sex. Here's the interesting thing. I like to say, let me give it to a little thought experiment for you. Imagine I had a time machine. I'm British, so, Doctor Who, big, worldwide phenomena. Let's imagine I had a blue box and I take you back in time. I'll take you back 50 years. To anywhere in America, 50 years, or let's say 100 years, actually make it more fun. And we'll hop out of our time machine, and then we'll go and find a random passerby in I don't know, New York, somewhere today that's fairly progressive, California. And then we're going to grab a random passerby, and you're going to explain to them this whole gay marriage thing. They're going to think you are nuts. Because in their culture, even 50 years ago, certainly 100 years ago, homosexuality was illegal, you could be arrested, you certainly were not marrying your same-sex partner. And they would think you are mad. They would literally not believe you if you describe what's going on in the 21st century. And then, of course, you get back into your time machine, you come back to the 21st century, and as you travel, you think, wow, I'm so glad I live in, 21st century Los Angeles or New York or everything where it's so progressive and wonderful. But then the thought hits you. It happened to them, it'll happen to you. Whatever things that you think are absolutely moral bedrock, nobody could ever dream of doing that. 100 years from now, it could be completely upside down. Because if you believe that morality is relative, to go, it changes, buddy. For all we know, 100 years' time, the whole world, North America has become Islamic, and we've got this really high, die-hard conservative morality, and you think those Christians had it bad. It's nothing compared to what's coming. My point being is that all the things that you care about are grounded on nothing. So what on earth gives you the right to think that your strange, peculiar, really weird 21st century Western view is somehow moral? Can you help me? And I turn the question around to them and smile. Because they'll probably say, well, it's just right to go, that's just you spouting opinion. Give me a reason. Because everywhere we go in the past would disagree with you. Many parts of the world we go today will disagree with you. And probably, for all you know, the future will disagree with you. So again, I ask the question, why is your position the right one? Because I think a lot of our friends, and Christians are not immune from this, have grown up assuming that the values that they imbibe at school, at university, through the media, just are obvious and everyone believes them. But that's not the case. A little history tells you that. A little culture tells you that. And what that means is you don't need to get hung up as a Christian on that particular issue. By all means, you can say, look, at some point, I'll happily tell you as Christians why, we think as we do on that particular issue. But I'm now interested in you. Why do you hold this issue as true? And how would you defend it to someone in the past, somebody in the other side of the world, or indeed even somebody in 100 years' time?
I'm curious, though, how you navigate that question when it does come up like that, because you're on one hand, you're holding everyone's an image bearer. God values every single person. We have human rights. And on the other hand, here's what the Bible says about homosexual sexual relationships. So how do you, and we don't have to get into a deep conversation about that.
No, exactly. Well, the first thing I do is I think it's always important to talk about their ground, Janelle, because often what happens is Christians scrabble around trying to defend what we believe, not realizing our friends have got a massive issue. The other big elephant in the room, if you're talking to a friend who's an atheist, the only purpose of sexuality on a purely naturalistic view of the world is survival and reproduction. So you can self-describe any which way you like, but if you ain't pumping kids out, Mother Nature ain't interested. And you'll get people say, that's bleak, and to go, it is, isn't it? But that's not my worldview, thankfully. But it is a problem for the secular worldview, that everything does come down to, this was that we talked earlier about the new atheism. Dawkins, right? The book that made him famous was The Selfish Gene. Our genes are selfish, and all they care about is reproducing themselves. Christians, I would say, a couple of things are going on. Firstly, God is ultimately interested far more in that everything that's wrong in us is forgiven and restored and put into relationship with him. So it's not that sexuality is the center of the story. It's part of the story. But I sometimes say, look, I'm sorry Christians are giving the impression it's all about sex. Partly it's a minor thing. There's a much bigger issue going on, which is how do we get put right with God in our very, very nature. But the other thing I would say is, look, that here's the thing with sexuality, that God has a very best in mind for humanity. He is the designer. He is the author, which means he knows us better than he knows ourselves, than we know ourselves. And marriage, monogamous marriage, husband, wife, family, is part of God's design that he's written as the very fabric of creation. And to go, therefore, as Christians, we think that's the very best thing. Now, sometimes when that doesn't line up with our own desires and inclinations, it's tough, and I get that. And I think it's important that Christians sit down and listen to folks and hear their stories and don't just bang people around the head. But to go at the same time, I think we can, as Christians, say that the Bible's view of sexuality is the best story there is, because it's written by the one who created us. But here's the other thing that we often forget. The piece that we don't talk about is what sexuality is for. On atheism, it's hard to see how it's any more than just survival and reproduction. Christianity does not say that, or at least Christians shouldn't be saying that. In the Bible, sex is the biggest metaphor, the big image that the Bible uses for that relationship between Jesus and the church. It's the best metaphor that God can give us for what relationship with him looks like. It's mirrored and foreshadowed in that relationship between husband and wife, which means, by the way, if you are somebody who is same-sex attracted and that marriage is just not something that's going to happen for you for whatever reason, you still haven't missed the end of the story. Marriage is the trailer. The big movie, as it were, is relationship with Christ, new creation, and eternity with God. Which means even if you struggle with the movie trailer, the thing it's pointing to is for everybody gay, straight, married, single. And we don't talk about singleness enough in all of this conversation. All the argument is about, well, who's sleeping with who. And I have friends who are single going, hang on, are we invited to this party? And the answer is, in Christianity, yes, because God doesn't go, no. Without a partner, your life is worthless. The world wants to say to you, you're not sleeping with somebody, you've missed the whole point, which is tragic. And I feel, I hear the pain of single friends and family who sometimes feel excluded both inside the church and outside.
Thank you for fleshing that out a little bit. I appreciate that, Andy. Sarah, go on. I know you've got more questions.
Okay. So lately, like today and just through past episodes we've been recording, I'm starting to get this, I guess, worry about how much effort and maybe not effort, how much, well, yeah, in a sense, like work, it feels like it's taking to figure all of these things out. And for me, it's very exciting and interesting, and I love it. But I see the people around me who are not as motivated or as interested, and feel like they can escape believing in God, I think, because it just doesn't feel relevant. So do you think that it just is that we have the responsibility to work through these things and make it make sense to us? Like, do we have to expect that of the people around us? Because in a way, like, I'm spending hours and hours on this and still feel overwhelmed and bogged down in details. And so it almost feels like hard to convince other people that they should do the same thing.
What? Oh, my word. That's a massive question. What a great question again, Sarah. I suppose the first thing I'd say is with your friends, with how you approach things. What you described there goes for everything in reality, right? I mean, with atheist friends, I often like to find analogies and, that they're going to be familiar with. So take science, for example. You can walk through life completely oblivious to physics. You don't need to think about physics to get through life. You can just, go to work, go to the gym, sit at home, watch Netflix, eat pizza. Life is wonderful. Once you open your mind to, quantum physics, let's start with atomic physics. Everything I see, the pizza, my computer, me, are made of these tiny, tiny, tiny little particles. What the heck is going on? And then you discover quantum physics and go, no, each of those is vibrating numbers of micro, subatomic particles all held together in probabilistic, multidimensional space. And you go, just make it stop. I just want to go to the pub. That's okay. We don't all need to be Stephen Hawking. But some people want to go deep, and science is amazing. If you want to go deep down the rabbit hole, you can go deep down the rabbit hole. I'm a rabbit hole guy. I played with AI for the first time last year, and I've spent the last 6 months reading nothing more than books on AI, and I've got 3 meters of shelves now because I'm a rabbit hole kind of guy. Other people don't need to be. And the same goes with the things of faith. If you are someone like you who is clearly a thinker, to go, it's perfectly okay to have questions and perfectly okay to think about deep things. The only thing I would say, it can be helpful to separate which questions are like the really essential kind of ones and which are the ones that are useful but not going to stop the show going on, as it were. And that the showstopper analogy, I remember years ago an old friend and mentor saying to me, Andy, you're a guy who asks lots of questions. Just in your mind, mentally have a box labeled showstopper, questions that if you don't get an answer to, you can't be a Christian, and have a box labeled I really would like to know, but it doesn't stop me following Jesus. And I would say until I'm in my early 20s, there were still questions in the showstopper box. It's now been empty for 25 years because the big things, is Jesus Lord? Is who he said he is? Is he who he said he is? Can I trust the Gospels? Did the resurrection happen? They took a little bit working through. But now I'd say no questions left, really. The other box, the interesting box, oh my word, Sarah, it gets bigger every year, mate. To go, I talk to people like you and I go, oh, I hadn't thought about that. There's another question in the box, thank you. I'll still be carrying that by the time I get to heaven. I'm probably going to walk into heaven going, Lord, I've got this massive great box of questions. So, and I can imagine Jesus going, Andy, you have eternity. Let's get going. And that analogy is just that sometimes we get the two mixed up. We think, I can't really be a Christian unless I know exactly what's going on with, I don't know, pets going to heaven or something. A question my son asked me the other day. He's 10. I was like, okay, that's an interesting question. But whether or not the rabbit goes to heaven is not going to stop me from following Jesus, even though I can't fully give a fully worked through answer yet. And then with our friends, I think a similar thing happens. What do they need to know to become Christians? The Bible gives a very straightforward answer. If somebody can say with her mouth, Jesus is Lord, and mean it, and believe that Jesus rose from the dead, they can be a Christian. And Paul doesn't go on to say in that passage in Romans, but by the way, they need to have worked out this and this and this and this. It's a fairly low threshold. That doesn't mean you get over that threshold and then just get lazy. I think for different ones of us, there'll be different things we want to work through. But I'm intrigued that the Bible really does bring it back down to, is Jesus Lord and did he rise from the dead? If you can say yes to those two things. So with your friends, as you talk with things, I'd keep bringing it back to, look, I'd love to talk about this and this, but can we talk about Jesus and who he is and what he claimed and what he did, and just keep it anchored there? Because that's how people come to faith in Christ. They come to faith in Christ, right? Your friends will, God willing, as you witness to them, hopefully over the years you'll see fruit. But it won't be hopefully because they go, Sarah's brilliant. My word, her answer to moral epistemology was so good, with multiple footnotes that I just had to submit. Where do I sign? Hopefully people go, man, there's something different about Sarah. There's a joy in her and an openness and a kindness. And she keeps bringing back this Jesus guy who just changed everything. And maybe I'll take a look at this gospel. And do you know what? He asked people, who do you say that I am? And I think I believe who he was. What do I do now? Well, there we go. So keep it Jesus focused.
Sarah, can I out you for a second? Is that okay?
Sure. Go ahead.
Okay. So Sarah reached out to me back in April because she has a lot of questions, and some of them are essential questions.
Yeah, good.
But the one that's the big question, and I think the one that we just talked about, I think it was yesterday, is the resurrection, and how to be anchored in that, because Sarah wants to be anchored, and these conversations, and Sarah, you're here, tell me if I'm misspeaking, but some of these conversations have been very encouraging for her. But Andy, you have a lot of great perspective. If we could talk about the resurrection for a little bit, I think that would be really helpful for Sarah. What do you think, Sarah?
Yeah, I was going to ask, in you saying you don't have the showstopper questions anymore, was that because you didn't, or was that because you got the answers you needed, or because you decided to submit and trust in God? Because that's kind of how I feel like I'm having to handle the resurrection of like, yes, I can gain more evidence and gain more confidence in what makes sense, but in the end, it is a matter of saying, I'm just going to choose to believe this.
I'm a big believer, Sarah, that it's sort of the two tracks simultaneously. There is a trust track and an evidence track. And I suppose I just think of an analogy for me. There's an analogy there with marriage. I mean, my wife and I have been married 28 years this year, so she deserves some kind of long-suffering medal for the still laughing at my jokes. But looking back to the early days of marriage, I knew a few things about her, but not a lot of things kind of about her. We dated for a short time and stuff, so I had to exercise a degree of trust. But then as I learned and got to know her more and figured things out and learned what marriage looks like, then the trust is still there, but the reason piece goes with it as well. So I think reason and trust walk hand in hand. So it's okay to say, I don't know everything, and Lord, I'm going to walk in trust, but I'd like some deeper answers. You can certainly, there's a degree to which you can, Christianity is proved partly by the living. One of my great spiritual heroes actually is a guy called John Newton, who wrote Amazing Grace, which is the most well-known hymn in the world, recorded by about 200 different artists, I think. He had a very dramatic conversion. He was a slave trader and a thoroughly horrible piece of work, and then has this dramatic conversion experience in the middle of a storm in the Atlantic Ocean on his ship. And then he gets back to England and he begins to worry, I don't know, was it the emotion of the storm that I've responded to? Is this true? And he writes in his journal, I decided that Christianity would be put to test by living. I would live for a year as if it were true and see what happens. And he quickly discovered that actually when you do that, things happen. And he didn't stay there, he grew in that. But it was really interesting of going, there is a degree that the metaphor that the New Testament uses for Christianity is walking. And with walking, you've sort of got to put one foot in front of the other to some degree. So don't be ashamed, don't worry that there is that trust part. However, it's also important we know things that really matter are true. And if you're going around, constantly worrying, is Jesus who he said he was? Did the resurrection happen? It's going to be tough the longer you go. So getting good answers there. And I think there are, and you've obviously, if you've talked to others, you may hear me go over some of the same ground. I'm worried that you've had Alicia on, actually, because you went on with Alicia, were you, Sarah? Or is that somebody else was on with you, or you were? So
She's
Alicia,
talked to Abdu Murray.
you talked to Abdu Murray. I'm in trouble now. You talked to Abdu Murray to go. He's apart from that, he's far too tall. That's one of the questions in my questions to answer God. If God is good, why is Abdu Murray 9 foot tall? When I'm 4'8", that doesn't sound fair. Anyway, so a couple of things. First thing I'd say with the resurrection, a good starting point, it's not the ending point, but a good starting point is if the resurrection didn't happen, you've got a really tough job explaining what's going on with early Christianity, because the first Christians, who were largely Jewish, they claimed that Jesus was the Messiah. The Messiah was supposed to overthrow the Romans, not get crucified by the Romans. And every other Jewish group we know of in the time period on either side of it, there were lots of Jewish groups who went around going, our leader is the Messiah. And then that leader often got killed, often crucified. Actually, the Romans put a very dim view of people claiming to be, Messiah. And in every case, what happened? They disappeared off into the undergrowth, going, well, clearly that wasn't Messiah, because look what happened. And there's lots of those examples. But something caused the first Christians to go, no, he wasn't. He was crucified, yes, but he rose from the dead. And in fact, we are now willing ourselves to go out and get crucified, persecuted, tortured, and all that for this claim. And in fact, you can find secular writers like the Jewish historian Pinchas Lapide, in one of his books on Jesus, has a lovely phrase. He says, what on earth is it that turned the first Christians from a bunch of dejected Jews, they'd lost their leader, they were afraid they were going to get arrested, what turns them into the most self-confident missionary society in world history? He said the only explanation is something like the resurrection happened. They must clearly have genuinely believed, and believed it so passionately, it did what it did. So the first problem you've got, if you say the resurrection happened, you've got like a resurrection-shaped hole in history to explain that start of the early church, because they could have just gone back to Judaism and carried on being Jews. Secondly, you've got the whole ludicrous nature of it. So you've got, for Jews, the Messiah is supposed to overthrow the Romans. For pagans, gods, which the first Christians claimed Jesus was God incarnate, gods are supposed to stomp around the place, using power and dominion. They're not supposed to get crucified and nailed to 2 bits of wood. And so, like Paul in 1 Corinthians, where he says that he calls the cross a stumbling block for Jews and foolishness for Greeks. What on earth possessed the first Christians to invent not just a resurrected, God, because resurrection was a weird thing, but also a crucified one. So you end up with either this thing happened, or what those first Christians were smoking, we have no idea, because it's such an insane claim. And then you come to the evidence that take you a bit further. So you've got the crucifixion of Jesus, an utterly shameful death. In fact, Tom Holland, who's a very well-known historian, wrote a book called Dominion, looking at the influence Christianity has had in history. He wrote it before he was a Christian. He now is a Christian. He starts by talking about, we've forgotten how scandalous the cross was. We hang it on bits of jewellery and stuff. The idea to a Roman mind that your God firstly took on flesh when flesh is bad. We want to get away from this world of matter to this world of spirit, and then was crucified, and then physically. What on earth are you talking about? Thomas says we've forgotten how scandalous that was. Secondly, you have the empty tomb. The empty tomb account is there, a very early Christianity. The presence of the women there as witnesses. Women, as you may well know, sadly in the ancient world, were not reliable witnesses. They were not considered as such. If you're making those stories up, why would you not have good, upstanding male witnesses? Peter, James, and John find the empty tomb. And there's other lines of evidence for the empty tomb too. Thirdly, say we have the resurrection appearances, and if you remove those, you end up having no explanation for early Christianity's start. You have the conversion of skeptics. James, the brother of Jesus, became a Christian and was martyred in AD 50, roughly, according to non-Christian historical sources. Paul, of course, who wrote about half the New Testament, went from being a persecutor to whatever. And then finally, you have actually the very shape of the early church, because the first Christians entirely rewrote their theology. They were Jews, but they rewrote their entire theology based around the resurrection. So you end up going, what do I do? How do I explain any of this if the thing didn't happen? So I would say those pieces together, and those are not one line of evidence, those are multiple lines of evidence, give you very, very, very solid ground for going, yeah, Jesus rose from the grave. It's the best explanation. And otherwise, you have a heck of a lot of work to do as an atheist, going, what went on here? Such that I often joke, I think if I was an atheist, I actually think the resurrection would keep me lying awake at night, because I'd go, this is really hard to explain. Other things I can kind of faff around with and mess around with and keep God at a distance, but the resurrection looks worryingly like it really happened. I think I would be thinking if I was an atheist, personally, based upon what I know.
Okay, so I've done just a tiny little bit of starting to look into the history around
Brilliant.
the eyewitness accounts, because I think that's something that I grew up hearing, right? That like the disciples were all martyred for their faith, and that's a strong piece of
All of
evidence
them
for
were.
the
That's
resurrection.
right, but many of them,
10, I guess, out of the 12, right? And then I don't know where I actually started going down this rabbit hole, but found out that that is based on, like you were saying, just church tradition or other bits of history that we've kind of woven together. And I guess I was disappointed to learn that it's not as solid as I thought. Like looking into Peter, for example, in the first writing that we have of his death, it's in the Gnostic understanding of him being crucified upside down, but not like in reverence to Christ. It is explained in a different way. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, exactly. I'd say a couple of things. I mean, the very fact, sorry, forgive me for interrupting you, saying that it wasn't all. I think Christians have overstated it, which hasn't helped. Okay. I think tradition is very strong. I think we have very strong, independent traditions for people like Peter and Paul. I mean, Paul is the interesting one because, of course, we have his prison writings in the New Testament. Literally, my kids this morning, we were reading 2 Timothy, and to go, there's very, very strong evidence both internally and externally for the death of Paul, under Nero, sometime in the early 60s. Which, by the way, is why why Luke doesn't write the third part of his work. He's got Luke, he's got Acts, and clearly he just stops with Paul there under arrest, and you think, well, tragically, what happened next? That's why there isn't a third volume. But even if you took a hyper-skeptical route and went, we're not even going to talk about there. We're just going to talk about internally in the Gospels, because with the Gospels we have, in the New Testament we have a series of documents written before 70. I'm completely convinced you can't get beyond 70 because the fall of Jerusalem doesn't turn up, and to go, the fall of Jerusalem will be gold dust to the right, say someone like John, who is working really hard to put a distinction between Jesus and what came before, or Hebrews, which is all about how the old things of Judaism have been replaced. It would be a dream to the writer of Hebrews to go, and look, this proves it. Jerusalem was destroyed by the Romans. So within the Gospels there, you have the first waves of persecution breaking out. We have the martyrdom of Stephen. We have Christians scattered from their homes. We have Paul, who's deeply embarrassed by the parts he played in that. We have then, you come just outside the New Testament period and you're into the the Neronic persecutions, persecutions breaking out in the 60s when eyewitnesses are still around. So even if you go, we're going to put the middle group of apostles, the main group of apostles, all to one side. Although even then, I'd say James is interesting, because James we have in Josephus tells us about the martyrdom of James in the 50s. So you could go, we're going to be hyper skeptical and go for the absolute bedrock for which there's no doubt possible. You still have an awful lot of persecution, an awful lot of very, very difficult stuff going on. Peter writes First Peter to the Christians who are being slaughtered for their faith. I mean, just go read 1 Peter into that context, and we forget, as those who love apologetics, 1 Peter 3:15, always be willing to give a reason for the hope that you have. He's writing that to a group of people who are getting killed for this. So I would say I am fairly confident the tradition is good. I'm sympathetic to tradition, especially where it's good, strong tradition that's gone for a time. And by the way, when it turns up in the Gnostics as well as the Orthodox, that's a positive, not just a negative. But just don't place everything on that and go, okay, we may not know every detail, but there are no alternative traditions where Peter goes on and lives to 100, has great grandchildren, settles down and writes his autobiography. To go, whatever happened, we know that first generation ended up being killed. Thomas is interesting because Thomas traditionally goes to India, and I've been to India, and I've been to the Shrine of Thomas. And what's interesting, okay, as a historian, I wish we had a bit further back than we did, but we do know we have very, very good continuous history for the Mar Thoma Christians who trace their ancestry back to Thomas. We can trace them back to at least 200 AD. Can we get back beyond oral tradition beyond there? No, we can't. But that the tradition is that Thomas goes to India, gets killed for his faith, and then by 200 we have a Christian community that can trace its heritage down to today very proudly. So, and it's quite humbling for us Western Christians to go, the oldest continuous Christian community is there in India, not in the UK, sadly. So those pieces together, I think, give me confidence. But again, it's being willing, Sarah, to go, I can know enough, but not know everything. And that's history, in a sense. The very nature of history is you can never know everything, but you can ask, is what I have enough? Is what I have good compared to the alternatives? You know, being slightly flippant there about Peter retiring into his hundreds and whatever. And in a shame on a culture too, we forget this, right? That actually it would have been much more honourable to have a story where Peter does go to Rome and convert half of Rome, and it's wonderful, and you know he's there preaching at a church named after him. So it's quite shameful in the ancient world. You know, the Christians were mocked by the pagans for you know, a lot of this stuff, and to go, yeah. So that again gives me confidence we're onto solid ground. I'm rambling because it's late. I hope some of that helps a little bit.
What do you think about the objection? Like we mentioned Alex O'Connor earlier. He did a podcast with a woman, I can't remember her name, that was talking about we've kind of blown out of proportion the persecution that we think happened in the early church days. And I haven't done the work of fact checking, looking into the history myself, which I want to do. But yeah, what do you think about, like, how are you getting that confidence of what happened? And is there any validity to the idea of, yes, maybe the apostles were killed, but they didn't have the chance to recant, or maybe they did, they just didn't know, like, their death is
Yeah,
anything that's recorded.
I think good question, Sarah. I haven't seen that particular podcast either. I've come across the argument. One of the reasons I think it's made is that I think if you're a skeptic, of course, the martyrdom tradition is a bit embarrassing, really. It's tough because if people are dying for their faith, and that's same true today, by the way, some of the most impressive Christians I know are those who have faced really bad persecution. You mentioned, I mean, and that works on different levels. You mentioned, you know, Abdu earlier. He lost his family for a time because of when he became a Christian, they disowned him. Others have paid a much higher penalty. What I would say is, again, history sometimes Christians do it, others do it. We can over exaggerate it. So we can, you know, the martyr tradition does have a tendency sometimes to go a bit mad. I mean, you look at the story of Perpetua, for example. Was she martyred? I think probably the sources are good. Was it quite as romantic and glorious and, you know, full of bits of speeches as it was? Maybe that's a bit of hagiography. But that Christians were dying and dying a lot and dying well. I think we have good evidence for that. Often because they've left us things. Again, it's late Friday afternoon, so my brain is completely gone, which is embarrassing. We've got the guy who writes the Epistle to the Ephesians, around about 100. Oh, I'll come back to me now. I want to say Ignatius. I don't think it was Ignatius. Anyway, he writes us his letter to the Ephesians while on the way to be martyred in Rome, and writes this beautiful letter to the congregations he's writing to, saying, you know, in response to their violence, be kind. In response to their, you know, their insults, respond with peace. You know, he is himself on his way to die, and he's writing to a congregation who know what it means to suffer. And he lays it out on the line as to how you should behave. It's very hard to go, oh, he was making it up. They weren't really going to kill him. They were just they were going to show him the zoo. That was the lions, and to go, it was all wonderful. And you know, back at Ephesus, it was lovely. And then we have other lines of evidence too, without getting to the boring detail on this. If you look back through the history of New Testament manuscripts, this is an interesting one. You know, those who've studied the manuscript traditions would say you can see the impact on the manuscripts that we have of where the persecutions happened and large amounts of Christian books were destroyed. We have really good sources for the New Testament, but you can see where you trace transmission lines back and it's cut off because collections of books were destroyed, scrolls were confiscated, things were burnt, and so on and so forth. And by the way, you also have the voice of the enemies too. So you can go and see what someone like, Nero says. You can go and see what some of the Roman emperors said. My favourite, by the way, is old Julian the Apostate in the 400s, who gets very angry that, despite all we've done to them, Christians, he says, are still going around, being kind to people, helping the poor, picking plague victims off the street. And he said it makes paganism look ridiculous. And he castigates the pagan temples for not doing enough for the common people because they hated, I think it's the hated Galileans, as the phrase he uses. They're feeding their poor as well as ours. And this isn't right because of what's responding. And so I think we have a whole range of pieces of data. And the trouble with history, Sarah, is to go, particularly in the modern world where we like a shortcut answer, we would love, one piece of data, one great historical source, one inscription that says this is what's happened, these are the numbers, you could just read it off, job done. Whereas history actually is multiple lines of tradition, multiple sources, written sources, inscriptions, secondary stuff, primary stuff, and it's putting the whole story together. But I think the overall story of the persecution of the church and what happened and how the church came through it. And by the way, to show humility, when we came through it, sadly, the church got into power. One of the tragedies is that then actually the boot was on the other foot, and we, historically started persecuting groups when we got the ability. So we want to be humble here and go, hey, we're not perfect. Don't ever give the impression that Christian history is a bed of roses all the way. But I do think I would stake my flag, if you like, on the fact that the church at its best, in those first 300 years when we were not in power and we hadn't started getting the idea that we pull on the levers of power to get our way. In the same way that the church at its best today is often the persecuted church.
Mm. All right. Well, we're wrapping up here. Sarah, any final thoughts for Andy? Any thoughts that you want to share with him?
Lots of thoughts. Thank you for being here. I'm going to have to listen to this again because you packed a lot in and I need to think about some things. But yeah, thank you for addressing my questions and appreciate the knowledge.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you for your questions, Sarah. They're great. They're great questions. So yeah, hold fast to what's true. Stake your, make Christ the center, and then explore outwards from there. Mm-hmm. And just to end on a thought that you shared earlier, that I thought was actually really, really beautiful one. Actually, is that I think one of the nice things about the Christian faith is that it is so simple that a child can understand it. You can become a Christian knowing very little, actually, but also it's deep enough that you can swim in the depths. So you're wired to be a thinker, and it's going to take some time to figure all that through. But of going, you need have no fear that you're going to somehow paddle into some corner of the swimming pool where the gospel isn't. And I love that. I love the fact that Christianity has some of the simplest people I know, and I don't mean that in the rudest sense in the slightest, just really straightforward people who would not describe themselves as thinkers. And then I love that it's got some most brilliant thinkers in it, men and women, whether it's Holly Ordway or Alvin Plantinga or whoever it is, of going, I love that it's got the spectrum. And which means you don't need to be afraid that some question you might ask or some corner you might try and dig into, suddenly the gospel will run out.
Me too. It's exciting.
Final question we always ask. The Finding Something Real podcast, Andy, is about finding restoration, eternity, authenticity, and love with Jesus. Which of those things, restoration, eternity, authenticity, or love, stands out to you the most in your life right now, and why?
Oh, my word. That's a really good question. I think love stands out to me the most right now for a couple of reasons. One is that that book you waved, the Muslims and Christians one, I just literally wrote an article for news magazine this morning, in which part I summarized part of that as part of the piece. And the fact that we take for granted love, actually, as the heart of the gospel, that it's unique. Islam, the other religion I know as well as Christianity, having studied it academically for 25 years, you don't have a God of love at the heart of the Qur'an. That's not to be rude or pejorative or anything like that. It just isn't. And we can take for granted just how incredible the love of the God of the Bible is. And then also as someone who loves ideas, but I also love people and to go, but my temptation is sometimes to spend too much time with the books and not enough time with the people. So God has to remind me to just times to shut the book and times to go and be with people, whether it's friends, family, people I'm ministering to. So yeah, I always want to be someone who combines love and truth, and I don't always get that balance right. So love is what I always want to keep coming back to.
Oh, thank you. I think you got the balance right today. Thank you so much. Until next time.